I welcome everybody to tonight's debate. Do we need economic growth? An exciting and interesting topic.
We are still living in an era of global growth. And what happened in Europe in the 19th century, the transition of agricultural countries into industrial countries, is happening now on a global scale. And it doesn't affect only some 100 million people, it affects billions of people who are moving from a very poor agricultural life into a modern, mainly urban and industrial lifestyle. And this, of course, is about economic growth, and economic growth at a large scale. Same with the growth of the global population from now around about 7 to at least 9 billion until the midst of the century. 2 billion more human beings with all their needs, but also with all their productive potential. This is about economic growth. And at the same time, and this is my specific angle I'm discussing this question, at the same time we are transgressing the environmental boundaries of the global ecological system of which the human civilization is dependent from. Climate change is only the tip of the iceberg. It's about loss of fertile soil in huge dimensions every year. It's about acidification of oceans, also a result of the growing influx of CO2, which is absorbed by the seas. It's about these enormous amounts, this avalanche of waste.
Only in my lifetime, and despite a rising population, which, by the way, it's something to be celebrated, because a rising population means that people don't die, which is a good thing. So 1 billion people in China and India came out of poverty. And this happened because of economic growth. Now think, for example, if 1 billion people would have survived cancer because of a cure, that cure would be celebrated as the biggest news ever. And yet economic growth is more and more problematized, sometimes by a tiny minority of people saying directly that we need less growth or growth is something bad, but usually with kind of an under-the-line message that yes, maybe growth is good, but. And where does that come from? Why do we have this growth skepticism? To begin with, it is the old conservative idea that having too much or wanting too much is a bad thing. Already in ancient Greece, there was the legend of Icarus, who had wings, but he flew too high and he came close to the sun, and the sun kind of burned his wings. And I grew up in school with this kind of message that careful, because if you want too much, something very bad is going to happen to you.
We should first of all clarify what kind of growth are we talking about, or what kind of growth are we looking at. I think the term growth refers to GDP growth. Yeah, this is what is commonly understood when you talk about growth. There are also other types of growth. We could say growth of the use of natural resources and all that kind of thing, but this is actually not what we understand by growth. When we ask the question, do we need economic growth, then this is actually correctly understood, do we need economic GDP growth? This is, I think, the question that we should address first. Now, to answer that question, we should also ask the question, who needs GDP growth? And my answer is, it's not the society. I could well imagine in a saturated society or a prosperous society like ours, that people move away from growth ideology. That they say, well, I prefer working part-time, I choose to do gardening instead of consulting, and so on. And people have, and I think this is what we already see is happening. So I don't believe that people really need growth. They choose growth sometimes, and sometimes they don't. Historically, they have chosen growth, yes, on a large scale. And they do still to some extent today, but I think this tendency could be reversing in a postmodern society. And nothing is wrong with that, in my opinion. However, we have one big player in this economic system who desperately needs growth, and this is the government. And why? Why? Because they have so much debt.
In Bulgaria, we actually have quite high share of renewables. In 2013, Bulgaria reached its renewables goal for 2020, which was 16, and we're about 20% now. I think maybe it's even higher than Germany. I don't know what's the German figure, but the Bulgarian one is quite high. And at the same time, in 2013, we had huge social protests against price electricity hikes, and we have extremely high levels of energy poverty. There are actually some people died because they couldn't afford to heat up their homes. And this movement was like really a movement of despair. I mean, about 10 people set themselves on fire on the streets as a protest. And at the same time, I'm not saying it's renewables to blame, but there is also another important question, like why is this happening, you know? And if this is not questioned in like political terms, we risk to have this slogan of green growth and so on misused by the same elite that kind of crashed the planet in the current situation.
Bacon took the view that humans should try to shape nature for the benefit of humanity. In other words, humans should not live in harmony with nature. Humans are not just a subsidiary of the natural world. Humans should try to master nature, to shape it for their benefit. And incidentally, I think when Marx, following Bacon, talked about the socialization of nature, that's what he was talking about. Human beings taking more control over nature. Not living in harmony with nature, the opposite of living in harmony with nature. Taking control over nature. And I think that insight is hugely important and very relevant to this discussion, because it's really a precondition for all the things that we enjoy around us. We have reshaped the natural world. We have increased labour productivity hugely, not just resource productivity, labour productivity hugely, people producing a lot more, and humans have hugely benefited from that. You know, look around you. You know, universities, electricity, airports, life expectancy hugely increasing. You know, average human life expectancy in 1800 was about 30. The average human being lived to be about 30. Now, the average life expectancy across the world, you know, for the 7+ billion people in the world, is over 70. Huge improvements. I could go on and on and on and on, but that insight that humans should try and reshape nature, to master nature, to control nature, not to live in harmony with it, I would say that was really central to create the basis for economic growth and central to a human-centred worldview.
That's what I meant, a controversial debate. Can I see shows of hand? Yeah.
You can see that in the car manufacturers, also in other industries, the small manufacturers die. So you kind of have to grow or you vanish from the market. So I can see where they're coming from. So how do you handle that conflict between, you know, growth for growth's sake and growth for social benefit? Like, how do we handle that?
Okay.
I totally agree with the opinion that we need economic growth on its own, but do the world need economic growth, or just some, for example, the developed country need the economic growth for now?
I happen to work for a firm in which their shareholder value is quite high, and yet they hire consulting companies to help them cut back on employees. So what you have here is shareholder value increasing and the number of employees decreasing.
First question is, what do you think, would it make sense to exchange GDP as a base for growth, especially in the time of digitalization?
And then one more question to Ralf Fücks. I like you a lot more when you're talking about human ingenuity than when you're talking about regulations and policing and all that sort of things. And do you see a way how we could get away with less regulation, less policing?
All our speakers speakers, please. I think this was one. Mr. Fücks, all our speakers, thank you. I think we had a wonderful panel tonight.